1. At about 8 p.m. last night. Yep, what a spooky time. I was walking with a friend of mine, Sally, about a mile to the closest cafe. We're both girls in our early 20s, neither of us own cars. Sally didn't have her Opal card, which is the Aussie version of an Oyster card. Basically an automatic ticketing system for public transport. So walking was our only option. It's summer over here, so it was still fairly well lit, and we were walking down main roads, so we weren't too concerned. We finally arrive at this cafe and sit down. I was paying, but I only had my credit card, and sure enough, it was cash only. Sally was on the phone when I got back from the counter, so I just gestured for her to stay put and guard the spot while I went to get cash out. This is my home suburb, so I know there's no ATMs around, and my best bet is a gas station, about a block away. I'm doing a light jog so I don't keep Sally waiting, when a balding, sweating guy, probably in his late 40s, with a tank top and no shoes, comes pacing behind me as I pass the corner of the block. He walked behind me for about 100 meters. I didn't really think much of it. The gas station was the next building along. It seemed like he had just come out of a nice suburban house along the street, and it wasn't the witching hour, so I assumed he was going to the station like me. He didn't even cross my mind as I entered the tiny convenience store. Nor did he follow me in. In my peripheral, I saw him walk past the door and out of sight. I looked around for an ATM they sometimes have inside. No such luck, so I go up to this man in his 30s at the desk and reluctantly ask if they'd be able to do cash out. He smiles and says, "Of course," and then asks, "Is he with you?" I have no idea who he's talking about at first. And then he points to the man from earlier, pacing around outside the store. Keep in mind, he didn't look at all menacing. He wasn't going back and forth just outside the door. He was drifting in the space outside, from the pavement to the gas pumps to the storefront, seemingly aimlessly. I assumed he was on drugs. I tell the clerk no, not thinking too much of it at all. He says, "Oh, he was staring at you before. I thought he might have been your dad." I laugh it off. I honestly wasn't concerned at all. He was still ambling around outside, and I couldn't imagine him having a fixed gaze on anything. I thank the clerk for the cash, and before I turn away to leave, he says, "Just wait and see if he leaves first." We wait for a few minutes in silence, and the guy begins to pace back and forth, directly in front of the wall of the store, looking straight ahead and never into the store. It still looked like the man was just on a drug-induced amble and seemed harmless. Not once did I catch his gaze, so I figured it would be safe to just slip out the door and walk back to the cafe in the fairly bright light of dusk. Especially since Sally was texting me at this point asking, "Where are you?" I thank the guy at the desk once again for his concern, assure him that I'm not involved in some weird scheme to rob the store, and head for the door. The clerk asks if I want him to walk out with me. I say that I should be alright, and begin walking away from the block. As I leave the store, the drifting man stops pacing and makes a beeline for me, from the other end of the building. I seriously don't think much of the guy at all up until this point. But for the first time, he was briskly walking in a straight line towards me. The hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I start power walking so that he doesn't think I'm actively trying to escape him. Still trying to convince myself that I'm just being paranoid, and should be more casual. I don't look behind me to see how close he is. I've reached the pavement on the other side of the gas pumps. When I hear the clerk run outside, he's yelling at me, "Go! Run! Run!" I make a break for it. Looking over my shoulder, he's grabbed the man by his shoulders from behind. The balding man isn't even glancing behind him or trying to escape. He's just watching me run away. That's pretty much the end of the story, folks. I keep running until I've crossed the road and then turn around, standing still. The clerk is still just holding on to the odd staring man. The clerk and I are just looking at each other in bewilderment, not really knowing what to do. He makes a hand gesture to go, and I gesture my thanks. You know, the clasp your hands together and shake them a bunch of times. I got back to Sally with the cash and bought food, before walking back home a different way. Overall, odd guy at the gas station, let's not meet. Nice gas station attendant, who went well out of his way to help my naive self. I'm definitely glad we met. 2. I'm an 18-year-old female, but when this happened I was 13. I want to say this all began around Christmas, and went on until February. I live in a small town in Massachusetts, where nothing really happens at all. Most of the people in the town have lived here for generations, and everyone seems to know each other, more or less. In my neighborhood, there was a man who lived a few houses down from mine, named James. James was an older man in his late 50s. He lived alone for a good reason, from what we understood, because the talk around town was that he was severely mentally ill. He had a tough childhood, and had seen some pretty tough things in his life. He was known to be a doomsday prep type person, with hundreds and hundreds of non-perishable food items stacked throughout his house and van. Yes, it was a classic creeper van, as well as gas masks and other such items. He also had an affinity for fire. He would constantly have bonfires going in his backyard. Whether he was burning brush or anything else, they were always huge. He would pour gasoline and other accelerants on to make the flames bigger and the smoke darker. As kids, we were always told to stay away from the house at the bottom of the hill, because he was known to yell at people walking by and just stare at them blankly until they were out of sight. And I guess our parents didn't want us to be in a position where that happened to us. One night, we had a house fire in the neighborhood, directly across from James's house. The house was occupied by an older man who would have died in the fire if his next-door neighbor had not ran in and rescued him as the fire started in the garage, right under his second-floor bedroom. The house was almost a complete loss, leaving this man essentially homeless until his house was rebuilt. No one thought anything about it, because accidents happen, right? Sometimes people's homes just burn down because of an electrical shortage or another reason. That lasted until we had another fire 3 days later. This time it was the house behind where James lived, as he had a corner lot. This fire too was also set directly under the homeowner's bedroom. And if she had not smelled the smoke, the firefighter said her floor would have collapsed and there would have been no way to save her. The most gut-wrenching thing about this whole story for me is that this woman had lost her only son. He was only 17 only a year before in a car accident. Now she had lost her home as well as her dog, who died from injuries he received in the fire. The second homeowner was adamant that she'd seen James walking around her house the night before the fire, almost as if he was scoping things out and looking for a good spot to start the fire. So now our attention was beginning to turn to James. He was interviewed by the police department, but he insisted he had nothing to do with it. They also had no evidence tying him to either fire, so they had to let him go. However, they installed security cameras on the telephone poles around his house, so they could keep an eye on him if anything else happened. My whole neighborhood was terrified. We had a lot of young families with kids and older people around. Some went to stay with family, and everyone else kept all of their outside lights on to illuminate the streets in hopes of deterring James from wandering around as he usually did. However, one night, I was up late as it was a weekend. I went out into the kitchen to get a snack. Over the sink there's a window that looks across the street, down a path that leads to a park on the other side of my neighborhood. There was a streetlight right at the end of the path illuminating the entrance. And who do I see standing there, under the light, just staring at my house? James. Terrified, I ran into my room and hid under the covers until I fell asleep. I know I should have told my parents, but I was young and too scared to do anything but hide. Luckily, I woke up next morning, and nothing had happened. So my family went about our day as normally as we could. The next morning, however, we woke up to good news. James had been arrested after he was caught trying to light fires under trucks at a local rental facility, like a U-Haul type deal. This time there were witnesses and security footage, so there was no escaping his guilt. He was charged with an attempted arson on the trucks, as well as destruction of property. He was also a suspect in the 2 house fires as well as 3 other fires at construction sites along the same road that the U-Haul was on. He is now a patient at the State Mental Hospital prison ward, and from what I hear he will be there for an extremely long time. So James, I sincerely hope I never see you in my neighborhood again. 3. I grew up on an island in Alaska, and I lived on the same property since birth to high school graduation. Our house was 2 stories, and the downstairs had a bathroom, furnace room, storage room, entryway, and rec room. One of the walls had some plywood pieces up, so we could feed extension cords through it to our crawl space. We had a C-shaped driveway that you would enter from one side, and then park in the carport, and then just drive forward to exit. The crawl space consisted of 2 big water tanks because we caught our own rainwater. We also used this area for storage. The space was 10 by 15, but only 3 feet high. You had to lift the cover up to get into the water tanks. You could only enter a crawl space from the side of the house. It was a 2x2 door that we kept a master lock on, but never actually locked it. Our dog Brewster's area was on top of this side of the house as well. He had a big fenced area, his own stairway and porch which was half covered, and he had a doghouse. Brewster was a Weimaraner chocolate lab mix who weighed 130 pounds. He was a fantastic dog who only barked when necessary. During the summer we had black bears in our yard most nights, and Brewster would give a quick bark to get them on their way. We knew his barks. There are 4 of us in my family, my parents, myself, and my older brother who is 2 years older and has Down syndrome. My brother was in special education at school, and there were other kids who would come into the same room, but once in a while throughout the day, because they had a smaller disability and were able to keep up in some of the general classes. But some of the kids had discipline problems or mental illness. My brother was loved by the kids in school, and everyone knew him. One day a native kid that was about 15 came to our door and wanted to play with Travis. We thought it was odd because Travis had moderate Downs and didn't really like playing with other kids. He liked watching kids play. Travis likes watching movies and listening to music. My mom asked the kid what his name was, and he said his name was Mark, and he knew Travis from junior high the year prior because he would go into Travis's class sometimes for help with his homework. I remember him staring at me a little too much, and he didn't seem like someone who was mentally challenged. My mom let him come in, but kept a watchful eye on him. Travis seemed like he didn't want him there, and my mom told Mark we were having dinner soon, and told him it was time for him to go. My mom found out he had moved into the area where we lived, but it was still a little ways away. He had been in and out of foster care most of his life. His parents were abusive addicts. I think he came over another time and my mom felt bad for him, but she felt something was off. She felt like he was coming over because of me. My mom politely told him that Travis didn't really like having visitors, and he seemed okay with that and never came over again. My parents went to a church service on Wednesday evenings and would be gone a couple hours. I would stay home with Travis. At the time I was 11 and he was 13. I started helping out in the church nursery when I was 9, and when I turned 11 my best friends and I took a babysitting course, which included CPR and first aid. We would babysit together and at age 12 started babysitting on our own. My mom was a homemaker and was always home except for Wednesday church service. My parents didn't drink, do drugs or smoke. I can only remember my parents going out a few times, where we needed a babysitter. I would leave the downstairs door unlocked for my parents when they were only going to be gone a couple hours. I was expecting them home in a half hour, and was surprised when I heard the downstairs door open, and I thought I must not have heard the car pull up. and Travis was up past his bedtime, so I quietly tell Travis to go to his bedroom and get into bed. I start walking through the kitchen to the top of the stairs and I call out, "Mom? Dad?" And I hear footsteps stop, and I'm looking down the stairs and I can see men's work boots and jeans. This isn't my parents. The way the stairs were set up, you could only see the bottom half of someone without descending the stairs. I'm scared to death and I run to Travis, who is going down the hall, and I grab him and drag him to my parents' bedroom, because it is the only room that locks, has a phone, and rifles. Down's kids are very stubborn, so my brother just wants to go to his room, but I get him to sit down on the bed. I am trying to keep him in the room while I am grabbing a gun and trying to call my neighbor. I can hear him walking around downstairs still. My neighbor answers her phone immediately, and I whisper that someone is in my house. I'm scared. She told me to come out onto the front porch and she'd be there. I get the courage and run to the door and get outside. Thankfully, she is in our driveway and has her hound dog with her. She lets me know that she is going to enter the house through the downstairs. She disappears from sight, but comes back quickly and tells me that the door is locked, so she makes her way up the stairs. She gets to the top when we hear the downstairs door open and the crunching of gravel as the intruder is running off. She lets go of her dog's leash and the dog chased the person into the woods. The dog came back 10 minutes later, and our neighbor sat with us until my parents got home. The police were never called because I think my parents assumed it was a neighbor boy screwing with us. We lived in a safe place, where you just had to worry about bears and the occasional wolf. A week after this incident, our dog would bark 15 minutes after we went to bed, every night. We would look out the windows and never saw anything. We figured it was bears because it was springtime, and Brewster was probably just getting used to them again. A couple months the barking still happened. I had my best friend stay the night, and we would always stay in the downstairs so we could be louder and stay up as late as we'd like. Kate had a brother that was 7 years older, and we asked if he'd bring us some booze. I know we were young, but that was a normal thing for our town. Kids started drinking, smoking, having sex in middle school. Because of boredom, I think. We got 13 feet of rain a year, so we would be inside a lot. It was a little after midnight, and her brother never showed up, and Brewster never barked that night either. We were sitting on the stairs, braiding each other's hair, and we both got a feeling like someone was looking at us. And we looked over, and a guy was staring into the window. We ran up the stairs in a panic. We thought maybe it was her brother, but he wouldn't have come to the window and spy on us. And the face seemed too dark to be his. But we had the lights on in downstairs, and there were no lights by that window outside, so it was hard to tell who it was. We didn't wake my parents up, just in case it was her brother. We waited 30 minutes and went back down to grab our stuff, and went to sleep in my bedroom for the night. The next day, we talked to her brother and it wasn't him. That night, Brewster was back to barking again. 2 more months go by, and I had gone to bed and heard Brewster bark. And I looked out my window and, as usual, didn't see anything. I had just dozed back off, and I woke up to Brewster barking frantically. I look out my window and I see a guy running out of our driveway. I thought about waking my parents, but we had a trail on the side of our house that kids used to get to the road behind us. The neighborhood was on the side of a mountain, so all the kids used trails to go straight through to another road instead of using the main roads. I had never seen someone come out of the other part of the driveway because the trail was on the south side of the house, along with the crawl space and Brewster's area. My room was the only room on the north side. I decided to go back to sleep, and I was tossing and turning. 15 minutes go by and I smell smoke. I go to the hall, and the smell is a lot stronger, and it's starting to get hazy in Travis's room, which was directly across from mine. I scream, "Fire! Fire! Wake up!" My parents are up, and Travis doesn't want to get out of bed. But thank God for the strength of adrenaline. We get outside and flames were pouring out of the crawl space. We get Brewster out of his enclosure, and the neighbors all come out to help us. The firemen were there rather quickly, but the fire had destroyed the crawl space and my parents' and Travis' bedrooms, because they were directly over the crawl space. The firemen got the fire out thankfully, and nobody was physically hurt. This was one of the scariest nights of my life though. I will always remember the fire chief kneeling down to speak to me after he had talked to my parents and said, "Melinda, we believe it was arson." I looked at him with tears streaming down my face and I say in anger, "Who is arson?" Everyone started laughing so loud, and I am thinking how this is funny. The damn arson could have killed my family, so he explained what arson was. I'm still friends with the old fire chief's son, and I share that story with him often because his father passed away from cancer when we were teens. His father is the only happy memory I have from that horrific night. The island I grew up on had a city and a village out south. We lived out south, but before the village. We had firemen far out south, north, and the city. We had state troopers for the island and city troopers in the city limits. My mom took my brother and I to our family friend's house, and my dad dealt with the fire officials, and a state trooper showed up later. After the investigation, my family, neighbors, and firemen pieced together that a person had been living in our crawl space for at least 4 months. We know he set the house on fire on purpose. He used a box of matches. My mom said the first odd thing she noticed that night was the smell of sulfur. We also know who did it. It was Mark. His uncle was one of the firemen who first showed up at our house, and saw him standing near our driveway watching. My mom had told him my description of what that person was wearing that I saw fleeing from our house, and it was what he was wearing. Behind our house, near the crawlspace area, my dad found where he hung out when he wasn't in the crawlspace. There were a bunch of cigarette butts, cans of soda, which were also found in the crawlspace. But because our crawlspace wasn't locked, our insurance company wouldn't have paid for the repairs. Because of our water tanks, the space was supposed to be locked. So my parents never said anything to the police, and the firemen never said anything. By pursuing this, we could have not had a home, a house my father had built. It took 4 months for our house to be repaired, and it smelled like ozone even years later. What bothers me the most is knowing he had seen me and my friends undressed numerous times while changing in the rec room during tons of sleepovers. Where he had set up shop was right next to the plywood with the holes drilled through. He listened to all of our secrets. I never explained to my friends that he had seen us and heard us during our sleepovers, because I didn't want them to feel sick to their stomachs like I did and still do. I still have issues when it comes to being home alone. I can't sleep if I am the only adult in the house. I keep the volume on everything very low. I am scared to shower. I like to be able to see the front door, and I have night terrors to this day, and I am 34 now. I have been dealing with anxiety since the fire, and panic attacks since I was 18. Just recently I was diagnosed with PTSD. When the intruder was in his early 20s, he was caught for burning down a few houses and was put in jail. All my childhood toys were stored in the crawlspace, along with a lot of our family's sentimental possessions. I hope this was easy to read. I have been dealing with a possible neurological condition for the past year, and I lose my train of thought easily, and struggle to find words that are simple. Edit. I sat down and spoke to my parents, and they reminded me of things I had forgotten, or not known as vice versa. I thought our house fire was pictured on the front page of the newspaper, but my parents don't recall that. My father has Parkinson's disease, and his dementia has gotten a lot worse this past year. I was only 11 when this happened, and I think there are more things that happened, but I must have blocked them out. It's like I have this memory, but it's so far away that I can't see it clear enough. But I am learning that with PTSD, you block things out to protect yourself. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 186. Thank you very much to everyone who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Okay, let's see, you guys should get this on Monday, so quick rundown for the week. I think we're sorted for subscriber stories on Tuesday. We should be good for more scary stories on Wednesday. Fingers and toes crossed for a glitch on Friday. Paranormal already sorted for it on Friday. And cross your fingers and toes for TIFU on Saturday. We'll see what happens. Okay, and with that, I think I'm going to head off for now. Give my poor old voice a bit of a rest. I think it's earned it. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.